All right, we'll go ahead and get started. We are on Habakkuk this week. I guess I'm not an expert at pronouncing Habakkuk. I always called it Habakkuk, like it ended in an H, you know. And when I got to looking at it and see that it ended in a K, I don't know if this microphone is struggling this morning. We're going to try something different. We'll see if that works. Okay. We're looking at, or the selection anyway, is the third chapter in the book of Habakkuk. And I talked to Jim this morning, and this is true of any of the minor prophets, or really anything we read. If you just read chapter 3, you really don't know much. You don't know what's going on, really. Just to read chapter 3 out of context, and I understand what the author's doing. You don't want to put the whole book in there, you know, but we will talk about the first two chapters in length because it's got a lot to do with what's going on here in chapter 3. In fact, it's got everything to do with what's going on in chapter 3. Yeah, there you go. Stands. Where are you? You just started 1 week. Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to talk about some things here, but I don't know how long you plan on being on it, Stan. Can't be too. It's only 3 chapters, so can't be too long. And Stan and I have done this before. We've overlapped each other on Wednesday and Sunday a few times, so that's not that unusual. But it is winding up here, and I'll be honest. Of course, a little bit different crowd on Wednesday and Sunday, but what I tell you today might speed Stan through it. I don't know. He might go through a little faster. I don't know. But if what we talk about today, but it is the next in our book. We go back to the books we just studied before, and you know we've got last week. If you remember, we won't go all the way back, but last week Nahum assured the southern kingdom that the Assyrians were not going to take them. He assured the southern kingdom that the Assyrians were not going to defeat them, that it wasn't going to be the Assyrians. He didn't say nobody was, or he didn't say who would, or didn't say if anybody would. But he basically Nahum tells them, go ahead and have your celebrations, go ahead and do your feasts and everything that you always do, because the Assyrians are not going to be a threat. Okay? Well, we go some years later now, and we talk about, and that was, by the way, that was about 100 years after Jonah, you know, when Jonah had gone to the Assyrians, you know, and Jonah had gone to the Assyrians and preached to them, and they had repented. Nahum was saying they have backslid, they have not received God's mercy, therefore they're going to be punished, okay? And he tells them who's going to punish them. You know, he tells them it's not going to be them, you're not going to defeat them, but they are going to be defeated. So we come to Habakkuk, and I want to talk about a few. This is something that I got. There's four themes in the book. Wrestling honestly with God about suffering and injustice. That's what Habakkuk is going to start in his. He's talking with God. He's conversing with God, and he is basically saying, "What are you going to do to the people of Judah, of the southern kingdom? What are you going to do to the people? They're not living like they should. They're not living like you know they've told them to." So he's wrestling with this. He's wrestling with this idea of what are you going to do to them, and then a bigger point is when God tells them what he's going to do to them. When God tells Habakkuk his plan, then Habakkuk's reaction is what? Yeah. That's no. That's not what I wanted you to do. That's not what I had in mind. That's not any good. And that's what the theme here, wrestling honestly with God about suffering and injustice. Habakkuk saw that as injustice. They're worse than we are. So why? That's not right. That's not just. That's not right. And God's going to basically tell him, you're not the one who decides what's right and wrong. God's sovereignty over nations and history Dodie, I was going to, sometimes when people tell me they're not going to be here, I said, like I knew, last week I said, Stan and Penny were going to be out, and this week Dodie and Judy are going to be out. I talked to Dodie when I talk history. I know, like I said, Dodie and I had some of the same classes at Murray State in history and have an interest in that. And God's sovereignty over history, God's sovereignty over the events of history is part of the theme here, because what God tells Habakkuk is going to happen, And also God's sovereignty over nature. We're going to get into a little point of this where Habakkuk, or basically God and Habakkuk are going to be discussing things, and Habakkuk is going to kind of relive all the times that God has actually used nature to, what's the word, not control, but to do His will. He's used nature to do His will. So that's one of the themes. Faith and trust in God even when circumstances are dark. We have faith and we trust in God even when circumstances are dark. We know that. We know that that's something. It's easier said than done sometimes, Habakkuk is going to end his book or his talk with a prayer, what we're going to see here in chapter 3. And he's going to end it by saying, you're right, God. You're right. What you're doing is right. Now, he's going to ask for a few things. He's going to ask for mercy, and he's going to ask for some things, but he's going to come to the understanding that it's right, okay? And the certainty of divine justice, and that's where we're going to start today. The certainty of divine justice, though it may be delayed, all right? Think about that for a minute. The certainty of divine justice, although it may be delayed. God assures us that evil will be punished, but He does not assure us that evil will be punished on our timeline by any stretch. Okay, it will be punished on His timeline, and there is an opportunity for salvation. Okay, there's always an opportunity for salvation until there's not. Okay, until there's not. So, question I have for you: do you ever hunger for the unjust to be punished? Is that something you've ever found yourself doing in your life? Is you hungers might be a strong word. Do you ever want or do you ever desire for the unjust to be punished? I dare say, once again, when I look at the age frame of all of us in here, I dare say that if you answered no, I'd have to say, on that a little bit, okay? I'd have to say, I don't know about that, but I trust you, but I'm not sure about that. I think probably at some time in our lives, we have all wanted or desired either a country or a person or something that we think's evil to be punished. Why aren't they getting what they deserve? Why aren't they getting what we think is coming to them? Okay, and that's kind of what we're talking about here a little bit. The certainty of divine justice, though it may be delayed. I want to tell you, me personally, on this. I'll be admit. I won't ask you to admit, but yes, I'm sure, and I know I could think of some times if I thought hard enough. But I'm sure at times in my life I have thought that's not right what they're doing, and I wish they'd get punished. I wish they'd get what's coming to them. But you know what? I will say this: the older I get, and the more mature I get and have gotten, the less I feel that way. But those feelings were much greater in me as a young person than they are now. I think I have matured, hopefully not just in age, but I have matured in my spiritual life as well. And I know what God says over and over again in the Bible, and I know that that's not for me to worry about. Okay, that's not for me to worry about. I don't get to choose when or if evil gets punished, or if they, whatever happens. So. I think we all might still wrestle with those feelings from time to time, but as I've gotten older, my faith in God has led me to say, God, you'll take care of this, or you won't, or whatever, whatever. So, any comments on that? Anybody have any other personal experiences on that? Agree, disagree? Probably you don't want to admit if you're the opposite.
No, I agree with you. You start off sometimes.
Yeah.
You've been hurt.
Right.
But you finally, if you're a Christian, you let it go. You come to the point that you have to say, God, they can be forgiven, and if they can, you need to forgive. But if they don't, it's up to you.
That's right.
And
That's right.
that's where we have to get to.
Yep. And sometimes it's not even, and that's a good example. Many times it's something that somebody's done to us, but many times it's just us looking at a situation and saying, they didn't do this country or whatever. They didn't do anything to me, but man, why didn't God do something about them? Why didn't God do something about that?
I think that's easier to let go of that.
I do too. I agree. When you've been hurt personally, it's definitely different. It's definitely different. Anybody else?
I still feel like somebody needs to take out food.
Confession time for David. I like it. I like it. Well, I have seen, and we will definitely not get into, I'm glad David brought that up, we will definitely not get into a political discussion, but I have heard a couple people say, I got a couple of friends who are former military, and I have got some people to say, heard people say, what just happened yesterday and the day before, they might be kind of sending a message a little bit too, that, this can be done anywhere possibly, but I don't know about that, but anyway. All right, yeah, so we still see this evil, like David gave, we still see this evil. And as far as I know, Putin hadn't done anything personally to David, as far as I know, but he sees the evil and he sees this, why? Why is it allowed, and that's part of what we're talking about here, part of what we're talking about here. All right, good. And like you said, you don't have to wait for me to ask, you can jump in anytime. And sometimes, here's another thing. I love this statement. Here's what Habakkuk falls in. Sometimes we want God to help. We want God to do something. We want God to help until we don't. We want God to help until we don't. Until what? We want God to help until... That's exactly right. We want God to help until it gets to the point where, that's kind of not what I had in mind. I didn't want that to happen, and that's the big story of Habakkuk right here, is him saying, when God tells him what's going to happen, wait a minute, that's not, I don't want somebody worse than us coming in here and punishing them. That's not right, that doesn't make sense. So we got to be careful about that. I tell the story, and if Jody was in here, I know she wouldn't mind me telling. She's told it before. She's told it in here before. When we pray for patience, and then when God all of a sudden gives us an opportunity to display that patience He has given us, we're like, I didn't want that. I didn't want to learn patience that way. So we've got to be careful what we ask for. Habakkuk asked for something, and God tells him what's going to happen, and he doesn't like it. So, and that's not just an Old Testament minor prophet story. That's a 2026 now. That's a 2026 story of what can happen to us, just like that. That when we ask for something from God, He might give it to us, but He might not give it to us exactly like we want it. But what do we have to do? How do we react to that? I think everybody would agree that situation has happened or does happen. How do we react to that? Yeah. We can argue, we can question God. Okay, I think that's normal. I don't think it's good necessarily, but I think it's normal that we question God. But where do we have to land eventually? It's God's way, it's God's will, and we have to bend to it. We have to submit to it. Okay? We have to have that attitude that we have to submit to it, because if not, we're probably not going to be happy. We're probably going to be frustrated, and we're not going to be happy. So when God does do something, and God does act in our lives, we have to make the best of it. We have to learn to deal with it. As Habakkuk did, like Stan said, at the end, Habakkuk is going to say, we'll get to that later, but he's going to say, God, you're right, and he's going to say, I'll mention this again when we get to the end. He says, God, you're going to do what you're going to do, and I know your will is right, but what? He has a button there. But show what? Mercy. Show mercy. If it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen. But don't let it be as good as it can be. Yes.
It's a thing that we studied when we talked about Jonah too. Jonah sat there on that hillside, all angry because God was going to save him, but just to realize that God should end up on top. Eventually, God teaches Jonah that, hey, you think more about a gold than you do
Yep.
And so that's where we're gonna end up.
That's right. That's
We're
right.
gonna end up in the end, hopefully, we're gonna realize we're wrong, or hopefully along with that, we're gonna say, you know, Lord, we were not all wrong. It was me that was kind of confused.
Yep. The bitterness. Jonah was bitter, you know, and that's just not the way God wants us to live. God doesn't want us, He doesn't want us to live that way. He wants us to love, you know, people. And loving people, even though it's so hard for us as humans, loving people doesn't mean you want them punished, you know, always. I guess there can be some things in there about the justice of God and the punishment of God turning people, and I get that, but you know, we don't want people destroyed. We want people saved, and that's tough sometimes. Like I said, real quickly, a little bit more about chapters 1 and 2. Then we're going to get into the bulk of the meat of chapter 3 right here. God is going to tell them. God's going to tell Habakkuk a couple of things. He's going to tell them that it's going to be the Chaldeans that's going to beat them, that's going to come down and defeat them and take them away, and it's not going to be pretty. But he also says what? What's going to happen to the Chaldeans? They're going to be punished too. They're not escaping. They don't get to you know, carry out my will here against the southern kingdom, and then they get to go off scot-free. They're going to be punished too. Okay, Chaldeans are going to be punished too. But before that happens, they are going to come in and run roughshod over here, and it's not going to be pretty. Habakkuk prays for mercy, but we know what's going to happen to the temple, what's going to happen to the city of Jerusalem. It's going to be wiped out, okay? It's going to be wiped out. There's going to be very, very little left, okay? But they will also be punished. Let's look real quick at page 54. Got a couple of things. This is just something from chapter 2, since it's not in our reading, that I want to look at. It's about midway through that first full paragraph right there. It says, to demonstrate His holiness, the Lord denounced specific sins by issuing a series of woes against theft, and it gives you the chapter and verse there, covetousness, disregard for human life, debauchery, and idolatry. Okay? So that's a lot of things there that God, you know, God's going to lay out His case here. You know, God's going to lay out His case to Habakkuk here. So those are some things. Those are some things that are going on that's going to cause the punishment. Okay, so that's part of chapter 2 right there. And like I said, in the end, and we're going to get there eventually. In the end, he sees it God's way, and he rejoices and trusts Him. He even rejoices to some extent. So Habakkuk is going to see it God's way, and he's going to trust Him. All right. Any overlying thoughts or ideas before we get into the scripture? We're going to read it in three sections today. Like the author's got it split up. All right, we're going to stop. We're not going to read it all together. I'm going to read this first little thing right here. This is a prayer of Habakkuk the prophet on Shigionoth. This is the best I can do to pronounce that word. Probably not exactly right, but Shigionoth. All right, I looked that up. Anybody know what that means? I didn't get an exact word. I didn't get an exact thing. Some historian, the word has basically disappeared. That's what I read. Some things that said the word, it just disappeared at some time and it's not used anymore. But what I got on that is basically under pressure, under stress, under duress. This is a prayer of Habakkuk under duress and under pressure and under stress because of what? Because of what? Because of what God just told him, okay? Because of what God revealed to him, he is responding with this prayer. He is responding with this, and it says prayer, that's what it's called, it's prayer. He is responding to this prayer, and he's saying, man, I'm sure this isn't something that he is taken a deep breath maybe and thought about, or I'm sure he's thought about it some because he's changed his tune a little bit, but this is under duress. This is under stress. We all know when we react to something, we react differently when we're stressed out about it, okay? So that's the best meaning. Stan, did you hear any, in your study, did you?
The author in here talks about it.
Oh, I didn't know if I read that part or not.
Yeah, he says something similar to that.
Yeah. Right.
if, if what some of the people think.
That word means.
They don't really.
No, they don't really know. That's right.
That's the best idea they have.
Right.
They don't know for sure if that's right.
That's right. That's right. So I can get it though. I can get why he would be doing that. You know, he was pretty stressed out about what God told him, as any of us would be. Okay. Let's see. All right. Let's read the first, and I might stop as we go through here a little bit. A prayer of Habakkuk the prophet on Shigionoth. O Lord, I have heard your speech and was afraid. Well, there's the stress right there. He heard his speech and he was afraid. O Lord, revive your work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years, make it known. In wrath, remember mercy. There's the phrase right there. In wrath, remember mercy. God has told him there is going to be wrath. God is not happy with the southern kingdom. The people of Judah, he is not happy with them, and there is going to be wrath. But right there, you know, Habakkuk's prayer, in wrath, remember mercy. All right. God came from Teman, the Holy One, from Mount Param, Selah. His glory covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise. His brightness was like the light, his rays flashing from his hands. And there his power was hidden. Before him went pestilence, and fever followed his feet. He stood and measured the earth. He looked and startled the nations. And the everlasting mountains were scattered. The perpetual hills bowed. His ways are everlasting. That's kind of a prayer of just saying, I know who God is. I know what God's done. This is what you've done. He's going to talk here in just a little bit. He's going to talk a lot about the Exodus, and he's going to talk a lot about when the people left Egypt. Okay, he's going to talk about when the people left Egypt and kind of what happened. Okay, kind of the things he did. He mentioned certain cities in Egypt right there. But the main thing he's talking about here is God's power. The main thing that he's talking about as we read verses 1 through 6 is pretty much the power of God. Is what he is kind of what he's talking about. I like the next one's a little better. He gets a little specific on the next one. 7 through 11. I saw the tents of Cushan in affliction. The curtains of the land of Midian trembled. O Lord, you were displeased with the rivers. Was your anger against the rivers? Was your wrath against the sea? That you rode on your horses, your chariots of salvation. Your bow was made quite ready. Oaths were sworn over your arrows, Selah. You divided the earth with rivers. The mountains saw you and trembled. The overflowing of the water passed by. The deep uttered its voice and lifted its hands high. The sun and moon stood still in their habitation, and the light of your arrows went at the shining of your glittering spear. All right. So this is kind of where he's talking right here about a little bit about all the things that God's done to his people. Remember when I mentioned nature earlier, about God's control over nature? That's what he's talking about here. God caused the Red Sea to split. Okay, God caused the Red Sea to split so the Egyptian army could not follow his people. Was God angry at the sea? Of course not. God was using the sea to perform his will, to do his will. All right? Rivers dried up so his people could pass, so the people could walk past. All right? These cities, what about these cities of the people when they heard the Israelites were coming and they heard kind of what happened at the first couple of battles? What happened?
They lost their will.
Absolutely.
We're in trouble.
That's right. That's right. Whether they believed in God or not, they believed something was going on. You know, they believed that here is an army coming toward us, that their God, as we call the God, but they might have said their God, controls the elements. You know, he can move mountains, he can drop rivers, he can split seas. How are we going to defeat them? You know, and that's what Habakkuk is saying here. That's what Habakkuk is saying here. As they marched, when they left Egypt, people were impressed with his power, and they should have been. Okay, they were impressed with the power of God, and that's what Habakkuk is saying here. You know, I know what you're going to do, and I know you can do it. I know you're able to do it. And once again, talks about how nature gave in to God's will to help his people. The last thing right there in verse 11, the sun and moon stood still in their habitation. Okay, we know that that's happened before, right? We know now, help me here, when the sun stood still, that was before this. Yeah, that was quite a bit before this. Yeah, I started to say that's a long time before this. So that is something that's happened. We don't know that God hadn't done that again at some point. We don't really know. It's not recorded necessarily. But that's what, that to me, that's what verse 11 is talking about. The sun and moon stood still in their habitation. God caused the sun not to go down, basically, so the battle could be won. So that's impressive. And that's what he's saying here in his prayer. When we pray to God, sometimes when we really want something or when we really want to ask something, how do we pray and how do we start off our prayer? We thank God. We talk about his power. How many times when you hear a public prayer or in your private prayers, if you want to ask God for something, you don't always, sometimes you might, and that's okay, but you don't always just jump right in and ask God for something. We praise God. We talk about how mighty he is. We talk about how powerful he is. We talk about all the things he's done for us. All these different things. And that's kind of what Habakkuk is doing here. He is going back and displaying all these things.
Jesus' moral prayer, the first thing he said, hallowed be your name.
Yes, exactly. It's just something. I think there is, like Stan said, I think there is biblical precedence for the way we pray, in that we praise God and we tell him how grateful we are. So.
This also kind of represents the vast size of God. I don't know where I'm not getting the right word.
Yeah, vastness is a good word.
Measure the earth
Yeah, that's right.
like he held in his hand.
That's right.
He's not somebody sitting on the throne.
No. And he moved, mountains were moved, he moved mountains. He's done all these things. So I guess Habakkuk's kind of almost preaching to himself a little bit. I guess Habakkuk might be saying, I guess who am I to question you? After all these things that I've thought about you did, who am I to question how you're going to carry out your will? And as we're thinking about this, it's hard for me, and I don't want to say this is something we have to do, it's hard for me to not put this in modern times. And say, once again, I'm a proponent of saying, God did all these things, that's recorded in the Bible. The Bible at Revelation, the Bible stopped as far as what we know from the Bible. But it's hard for me to believe that after Revelation was written by John, that all of a sudden God just stopped paying attention to world events. That God all of a sudden just stopped having a hand in what's going on in this world. So, all right, verse 12. You marched through the land in indignation. You trampled the nations in anger. That's, I think, the Egyptians again. Look at verse 13. We're going to talk about verse 13. We're going to read something here in just a minute. If you read the lesson, you probably know where I'm going with this. You went forth for the salvation of your people, for salvation with your anointed. You struck the head from the house of the wicked by laying bare the foundation to neck. All right, flip over to page 57 real quick. This is what the author gives as three possible explanations for what was meant by your anointed. Okay, and you can see where it is here. You see the 1, the 2, and the 3. And these are just from anybody, I guess, just from people who studied it. Number 1, it may reference the Davidic king, King David. It may reference the coming Messiah, or it may reference the nation of Israel, God's chosen people. Just looking at it and reading it in context, I don't see how you could almost make an argument against it, meaning the Messiah. It looks to me like it really is talking about the coming of the Messiah. Now, I probably haven't studied it as much as these people, whoever made this list here, okay? But for the salvation with your anointed, yours capitalized and A is capitalized, with your anointed. And it talks about striking the head. Look down at the bottom of that paragraph. Regardless, it's possible the reference to God striking the head from the house of the wicked recalls the promise God made to the serpent in Eden. Where would the serpent be? Underfoot. Okay, so I think that's a pretty good possibility there. So, I don't know that we'll ever know for sure, but I do believe that verse 13 is somewhat of a messianic prophecy. It's talking about, could very well be talking about Jesus there, okay? Because it goes on to talking about how is, I don't know, what is the main way that God is going to strike the head of the serpent? Through Jesus, okay? Through Jesus. That's the main way that it's going to happen, all right? Lots of imagery, and the rest here, I won't talk about it, but there's lots of imagery. Let's see, we already read 13. You thrust through with your own arrows the head of the villages. They came out like a whirlwind to scatter me. Their rejoicing was like feasting on the poor in secret. You walked through the sea with your horses through the heap of the great waters. When I heard, my body trembled, my lips quivered at the voice. Rottenness entered my bones, and I trembled in myself, that I might rest in the day of trouble. When he comes up to the people, he will invade with his troops. I wish it had included verses 17, 18, and 19. Verses 17, 18, and 19 is basically where Habakkuk says, I understand your will, I support your will. Please have mercy, please have mercy on what's going on. But he would accept this, okay? He wants to endure. He wants the people to endure, and they are going to endure, okay? But lots of imagery right there. Habakkuk ends by accepting this. Habakkuk ends by saying, this is, I accept this, and not that he had any choice, but I accept this. All right, we got about 6 or 7 minutes. We got a couple applications and a couple of questions I want to get to. But any thoughts you have here on what Habakkuk has said? Rick talked about, the vastness of God and how overwhelming in control he is. I think there's a lot of things that we could discuss on that. But any thoughts? Look at the first application. I think it's pretty good. He realizes that God is in charge. And let's just read. The character of God is on display in Habakkuk's prayer. Knowing that God is the Holy One, the prophet questioned why God allowed those who were more righteous to suffer at the hands of the wicked. Upon hearing God's response, he accepted the inevitable. Nevertheless, he said to God, in wrath, remember mercy. And that's what we're talking about here. I love the verse that it says in Daniel there, to the Lord our God belong mercy and forgiveness, though we have rebelled against him. Mercy and forgiveness are the Lord's, although we have rebelled against him. We have to realize that God is in charge and God's will be done. We can question God. It's been done throughout the Bible. We know Moses, several people asked God to change his mind. Occasionally he did, But in the long run, we have to accept the will of God. We have to accept what God has in store. He doesn't tell us by direct method like he did Habakkuk, but we still have to do that. We still have to understand that, and that's part of the second one too. Is not questioning God's decisions, not questioning the things that God has done. And I think we can, if you look at history, I think we can look at things. One of the questions that I want to bring up is this applicable to today? And I think we have seen things like this happen before. I think we have seen wicked nations defeat wicked nations, and then they had gone on to fall as well. I don't want to necessarily bring up specifics, but I think we've all seen that. I think you can look at a country defeats another country, and it might be just as bad or worse, But I think God's will is still still there. One of the questions that's asked is it seems like a very shallow question, but it's actually a very deep question. Somebody here, I want to get your thoughts on this. How do you feel about questioning God? Now, that's kind of a loaded statement, all right? Jeannie, smile. How do you feel about questioning God? Is it okay? Is it okay to ask God why? Is it okay to ask God to change his mind? Or should we just accept his will totally? Tough question.
I think it's okay.
Okay?
Blame God is wrong.
Okay, all right. That's good.
I think
Question.
wonder why.
Okay.
Did they not in the Old Testament?
They did.
Talk directly to them?
Yep.
I think if you blame God, that's what you
Okay. Anybody else? I agree with that, by the way. I don't think it's wrong to discuss with God. I don't think it's wrong to ask why. You know, why is this having to happen to me? But in the end, what? Have to accept it. Yeah, in the end, we have to accept it. I think it's human nature. I think it's human nature to question sometimes why things are happening and to ask God, you know, what can I do about this? What can I do to, you know, help me change this? You know, any other thoughts though?
And do you think, I think when you are questioning and praying why, sometimes it makes you realize things about yourself.
Sure, sure. And I think Stan brought up, we brought up Jonah earlier, and Stan talked about Jonah. I think sometimes when we start questioning God, God shows us. God shows us why He's right and we're not. You know, that the thing with Jonah, you know, he knew Jonah's thoughts. He knew Jonah was sitting there stewing. He was over saving. He saved all these awful people. He was sitting there stewing, you know. So, you know, God could have went to Jonah, and Jonah was a prophet, so there was some direct communication there. God could have went to Jonah and said what He said to him in the first place. I mean, what He said to him after the event. Stan quoted what He said to him. You know, you care more about this plant, this gourd, than you do those 10,000 people. Without the plant or the gourd, would the speech have meant as much? No, it wouldn't have been the same. So what did God do? God caused the plant to rise up and then die in a day so that Jonah could learn the lesson, so that Jonah could understand what God was saying to him. I'm not sure Jonah would have understood if God had just said, Jonah, you should, you know, why are you feeling like this? You should be concerned about these people. It took an action. It took something in Jonah's life, very brief part of Jonah's life, but it took something in Jonah's life for him to realize, oh yeah, that's, you know, I shouldn't care more about this little plant that was here for a day than all these souls that are going to be somewhere for eternity. I think God still probably does that today. I think God probably still puts things in our lives. I know I have. Have you ever questioned God and then 6 months, 3 months, 1 year, whatever, said what? Oh yeah, I get it now. That makes sense. I get it. I think we all have. You know, God puts stuff in our lives that make us sometimes understand those things. We've all been, you know, God, why didn't I get that job? Why didn't I get that job? Then 6 months later, oh yeah, I see why I didn't get that job now. You know, I get it. I think God still does that. All right, last thing, unless you've got any comments. Jonah finishes in praise even though he didn't get the answer he wanted. Okay? And I think that's a good life lesson for us. Jonah finishes his prayer, finishes the book in praise, even though he did not get the exact outcome he wanted. What outcome let's look at this real quick. What outcome did Habakkuk want? In the beginning, what outcome did Habakkuk want? That's right. That's right. He wanted Judah to be punished. And Stan, I can't think for Habakkuk, but in his mind, he's probably thinking, God, do something to punish these people, make them turn, and then we'll roll on, you know, okay? That was Habakkuk's plan. Well, that wasn't the plan God had, okay? God said, yes, you're right, they're going to be punished, but here's what I'm going to do. And Habakkuk hated that plan. He didn't like that plan at all right? But in the end, he turned back to praise. That's where he finished, okay? It's not always where you start, it's where you finish. So that's where we need to finish. Whenever we are questioning God, possibly whenever something happens in our life that we don't agree with, where do we finish? We finish with praising God, saying it's your will and I understand and I accept it. And it's okay to go ahead and add what else Habakkuk added. What else did Habakkuk add? Please give mercy. You know, even though this has got to be done, what? Let there be mercy. Let it, you know, keep mercy, you know. So I think that's okay. That's a great lesson for us. Whenever we question God, let's finish with, God, your will be done. I'm going to praise you no matter what. Okay? I'm going to praise you no matter what because you are God. Anytime people question God, not anytime, but a lot of times when people question God, in the Old Testament, where we still hear God conversing occasionally, what's God's answer? He doesn't answer the question directly. He doesn't answer what they question directly. His answer is, and I always go back to Job. What's God's answer? Do you make it rain? Do you make it snow? Are you the one who controls the wind? You know, God doesn't always give us an answer, but his response is what? I'm God and you're not. Yeah, I'm God and you're not. That's his response. And folks, that's all we need. When you had children, your kids, did you ever have to tell them, when they ask why, did you ever have to tell them just because? Well, of course we did. Why do we tell them just because? Why do we do that? We tell them if we really they don't have the exactly. They don't have the ability to understand, but we do. Folks, it's the same with God and us, okay? We don't have the ability to understand all the things that God puts in our lives. And sometimes God has to say, you know why this is happening? Because I'm God and you're not, okay? Just like parents. If it is something we can explain, we do sometimes. Many times, though, it's something you don't understand. You know, why can't I cross the street to go see my friend? Well, you just can't. Okay, that's not safe. We can tell them that you could get hit by a car or whatever, but they're going to keep saying what? What's the question going to keep being? Why? Do you ever get? Everybody else gets to. You ever get tired of your kids asking you why? Yeah, at some point in your life you have, whether you remember it or not. At some point in life you got tired of your kids asking you why. Think God gets tired of us asking him why? Probably does. All right, thank you. That's right.